Act was signed into law. Native Americans were given the right to vote in Arizona 24 years after that in 1948. The first people of this nation were one of the last to be granted citizenship and the ability to vote. Today, unless you are Native American, you are not from this country. Somebody brought you here. The Mexican people have been here before the inception of Arizona, and this land is called Aztlan. I was in Mexico just yesterday because my family lives on both sides of the border. Many people, many Mexican people and Native people who are actually from Arizona can tell you it is pretty normal to go back and forth between the two countries because we did not cross the border crossed us. We don't have to go to the border one time to see what is happening. And if you want to talk about an invasion, let's remember January 6th and what happened at our nation's capital. That is
All
the
right,
real invasion.
Mr. Aguilar, I expected that from you. You will stay to the bill or I'll sit you down. One chance. That's the one. So in the bill, HCR 2060. Thank you.
To the bill. As Republicans continue to introduce laws like HCR 2060, in my opinion, they continue to feed a false narrative that there is no discrimination from law enforcement. But in the same law, they give law enforcement immunity, meaning that law enforcement is legally protected and exempt from liability of discrimination. Then to top it off, the section of this bill on probable cause is just straight ... If I have been discriminated by the color of my skin or the language I speak, I should be able to take that case to court. 14 years ago, one of my aunts was actually deported in the US. And she did not speak English, was a Spanish speaker, even though she was a United States citizen. When you are from Arizona and grow up around when you are from Arizona, you hear that from Native Americans and Mexicans all the time, especially during SB 1070. This bill would lead to a rise in discrimination, and the way we know this is because we've already seen it. Many of us have lived it. Family members and people that we know have been racially profiled while driving. There's even an infamous show in Family Guy that has been showed where they discriminate people based on the color of their skin. If we want to edit HCR 2060, maybe add the law that law enforcement will be held accountable and criminally charged if they discriminate, not given them immunity. This bill also has no money attached to it. So guess what? These officers will most likely not be properly trained on the law, which can lead to discrimination. The next issue with this bill is Section 4 on fentanyl, which we all want to tackle the fentanyl epidemic, including Democrats. But in this current language form, in Section 4 of this bill, it reads that basically if fentanyl is manufactured in the United States,
Mr. Aguilar, how do you vote?
What?
How do you vote? Your time has expired.
I vote no.
Great. Mr. Aguilar votes no. Representative Liguori.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
So my family immigrated from England and Ireland. My husband's from Italy and Poland at a time of violent political unrest. So I know how I am voting today. It's the same way I did when these bills came in through committee and they came through the floor. And again, now that they're all crammed together in this resolution. I also know how many people I've been talking to around my district will vote on this, as they are fired up about the legislature's overreach into abortion decisions as much as they are now against HCR 2060. We have a lot of engaged and angry people. Explaining my vote today will be for the hardworking taxpayers of our state. I want to outline what it is they will be deciding on if this makes it to their ballot on November. So I made an old-fashioned pro and con list for HCR 2060. Here it is. Pro. Our immigration system is in dire need of updating so that we as a country are meeting the moment. We need to modernize, retool, and better resource our border. Things like the federal bipartisan immigration bill that Republicans now refuse to work on, which would strengthen paths for legal immigration, close cartel loopholes, and add detection systems to find fentanyl where it is coming through at legal ports of entry. Cons. Massive overburdening of our police, our prisons, and our legal systems. What 2060 is asking of our Public Safety Department and Department of Corrections is a logistical nightmare. Police are not trained as border agents. Immigration law is a small specialty practice. The capacity we would need to detain, process, and hold suspected non-citizens would put our jail and prisons at full capacity with overflow bleeding into state structures. Police budgeting and staffing are already constrained. Patrols are already being reduced and public safety will suffer. This is an enormous tab to taxpayers. It's estimated that 2060 would incur a minimum annual cost of $325 million, including upwards of over $1 billion as we fight lawsuits against the unconstitutionality of it and the effect of reputational damage our state will have, as we saw with SB 1070. The prison system is estimated nearly $252 million over 5 years to incarcerate the number of adults they might have to process. So let's look at SB 4 in Texas. This is our peek into our financial future, and we don't have to look far. SB 4 is more extreme and overreaching than 2060, and also SB 1070. Texas allocated $1.3 billion, basically the entirety of our state's current financial deficit. And the costs are already estimated to have exceeded over $1 billion. We do not have the money for this. I will not support a blank check for our taxpayers to foot the bill for billions of dollars that we will spend if this is passed.
10 seconds.
So how do we lead here? President Biden is leading, and in the words of Senator Sinema, don't come to Arizona with your taxpayer-funded political theater.
How do you vote?
The public trusts us to govern with integrity, and I vote no.
Liguori votes no. Representative Villegas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
You have heard from many of my colleagues. No matter what is said, I'm pretty sure that your mind is made up. But I want the people of Arizona to understand that if HCR 2060 were to pass, it would do nothing to fix the immigration crisis. It will only add to the fiscal issues we will continue to face because of irresponsible decisions I've witnessed in my short time here. Today, I will provide a historical perspective and highlight some of the root causes of the ongoing border crisis between the U.S. and Mexico. It is a complex issue deeply linked with U.S. foreign policies and their long-term impacts on Central America. First, let's talk about the war on drugs, initiated by the U.S. in the 1980s. This campaign aimed to curb illegal drug trade and use. However, it led to severe militarization and violence in countries like Mexico, Colombia, and Honduras. The result? Increased gang violence, corruption, and lawlessness forced countless families to flee their home in search of safety. Next, consider our economic policies, particularly NAFTA under Clinton in '93 and CAFTA signed by Bush in 2004. These trade agreements were intended to strengthen economies through free trade. Instead, it mostly devastated local industries in Central America. Small farmers couldn't compete with subsidized U.S. agricultural products, leading to widespread unemployment and poverty. To this day, this economic displacement has driven away many to seek better opportunities north of the border. Moreover, our complete blockage of trade with countries like Venezuela has exacerbated economic hardships. Sanctions intended to punish governments have inadvertently hurt ordinary citizens, pushing people to migrate for basic necessities and a chance at a stable life. In Guatemala, our involvement in funding and supporting wars during the Cold War era left a legacy of violence and instability. The repercussions of these conflicts continue to displace families who are still seeking refuge from the remnants of war. Let's also consider the impacts of climate change. Severe droughts, intensified by global warmings, have devastated crops and livelihoods in Central America.
20 seconds.
These countries contribute very little to climate change, yet they experience the worst effects. As their homes and as their farms and homes become uninhabitable, they migrate out of necessity,
10 seconds.
not choice. In conclusion, the border crisis is not merely a matter of people seeking a better life. It's a humanitarian issue rooted in a complex web of U.S. foreign policies, economic strategies, devastating COVID-19 after
How do you
effects.
vote, Representative Villegas? Your time has expired.
It will not work.
Please vote.
It is a waste
Please
of
vote.
resources, time, and money, and I vote no.
Villegas votes no. Representative Barbara Parker.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
As a second-generation Italian immigrant, I love the stories my mother said of her parents and grandparents who came through a legal port at Ellis Island to work in the coal mines of Utah. And her family taught her to obtain citizenship and learn English. Recently, I traveled back from overseas where I came back through customs, and the border agent looked at my passport and ID and said, "Oh, you're from Arizona." Well, I'm from the Philippines, and I stood in line and waited for years to come to this country legally. But you in Arizona just allow people to walk across the border. Why do you do that? It is a slap to the rest of us who dotted every I and crossed our T's and filled out the paperwork and stood in line. In fact, he said, "Why is Arizona allowing," and he used the term illegal aliens, which, by the way, is in Title 8 of the US Code and is used 33 times. He said, "Why do you allow illegal aliens to take advantage of America?" Well, I had to tell him, we are trying to fix this. But what's not said and what hasn't been said at all today and what needs to be said more is to praise all the citizens and the families and the migrants who choose to come here legally and through the proper channels. I applaud all the people who are living now in war-torn countries, who are seeking a better life, but yet are choosing to uphold our laws and use legal pathways and not violate the border. And they are doing it appropriately each and every day. I applaud parents who are not encouraging their children to violate state and federal laws. I have to applaud those who do not consider it an entitlement to be here because they crossed illegally and that they think that should be tolerated. As a lawmaker, we cannot allow law breaking. We welcome everyone who comes here legally. Our doors are open to all legal immigrants. This is not about a race or any race. This is about crime. The crime of crossing an international border when you are not allowed to do so. Under the 10th Amendment, the states have rights. And I've pored over this language, and it mirrors federal and constitutional law. Under Article 1, Section 10, Article 4, Section 4, and it will be upheld by the courts. We will save over $2 billion as we will not have to medicate, educate, and incarcerate the fallout of a porous border. This bill will save lives, and it will help to stop the number of crimes, not all of them, but it will put a huge stop to a number of rapes, murders, getaways, sex trafficking, fentanyl deaths, terrorists, child abuse, extortion, and cartel violence. This is an incredible
10
border
seconds.
security bill that the citizens are demanding that we pass. I applaud it and I vote yes.
Barbara Parker votes aye. Members, I ruled earlier I wasn't going to let Ms. Ortiz speak, but she came up to me and we spoke and she made good on her violation of Rule 19. So I told her I'd give her a chance. So I am reversing my ruling. Ms. Ortiz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you for allowing me to speak, not on my behalf, but on behalf of the people of Maryvale and Glendale in Legislative District 24, who I represent. My family line spans back generations in what is now present-day New Mexico. In other words, the border crossed us. Yet under HCR 2060, my brown skin could be the cause for an Arizona police officer to pull me over, arrest, and detain me on suspicion that I don't belong in the state where I was born and raised. My community has lived in fear under SB 1070, and the provisions in HCR 2060 will instill that same fear, especially for our children who have parents who are undocumented. I want to read a story from my constituent in LD 24, Sandra. My family and I have lived in Glendale for over a decade. I'm a mother of 5, grandmother of 4, a faith leader, and a leader in my community and a small business owner. My family experienced SB 1070, and my oldest son moved to New Mexico due to the fear of being separated from his wife and son. I also remember when my family would go to church, we prayed the whole way there so the police wouldn't pull us over because we had a sticker of Psalms 91 in Spanish and an old truck. 14 years later, I'm terrified that my grandchildren have to experience what my children experienced, the consequences of this cruel and inhumane law. I am angry that my grandchildren will not get the medical care all children deserve because this law will put a target on their parents' backs and criminalize their presence. I will continue to pray and advocate for my families, my neighbors, and for a better Arizona where we actually care for our community members and not terrorize them with laws that take away our inherent dignity and humanity. I want us to think of the faces of all of those children who will have to come home from school not knowing if their parent has been arrested, detained, or deported because of this cruel, inhumane, and unconstitutional law. We need to leave these solutions up to the federal government, who have a package on the table that Republicans are refusing to acknowledge. And finally, I want to state briefly that I was a reporter along the Texas-Mexico border when Governor Abbott sent state troopers down to the border, diverting local law enforcement resources to the border when they had no funding and no training. And it resulted in a story that I broke where a DPS trooper fired his weapon at a Border Patrol agent because he thought he was a migrant. There was absolute chaos. And these are the situations that are going to happen in Arizona. And we've already heard law enforcement say they don't have the resources for this. It is wrong to send this ballot initiative to the voters and then send them the receipt later, which could be millions or even billions of dollars.
Ortiz, how do you vote?
I am doing the responsible and humane thing in voting no.
Your time has expired. Thank you. Ortiz votes no. Representative Minority Leader Lupe Contreras.
Mr. Speaker, Pro Tem, I write for a point of privilege.
Please
or
proceed.
explain my vote, I'm sorry.
Please proceed.
So there was a comment that was made earlier in regards to the minority leader and the House, House and Senate, and the Speaker and the President in regards to intervening in court. I want to correct that statement because we could only go and defend this bill. That's the only thing we would be able to do. If we would find anything that was bad about the bill, we couldn't do anything about it. So I want to really put that on the record. So as my minority leader, there is nothing I could do about this bill in court. Knowing right now already that there's things that are bad, as I and my members over here know. So let's put that on the record already, okay? Also, there's some parts on this bill that talk about fentanyl, and I don't think that the fentanyl pill is gonna have a stamp on it in the back that says "Hecho en Mexico." So let's also say that. And I think you all know on that side of the aisle what I'm talking about. Okay, so there's no stamp that says "Hecho en Mexico" on those fentanyl pills. Other than that, you know, I wasn't on that trip also on Friday, but I can't count on my hands and toes how many times I've been to several borders and crossed the border because my family is on the other side of the border. I'm first generation. I'm proud. Mi familia es de Caborca, Sonora, y yo sé hablar ese idioma. I'm proud of it. My dad came to this country when he was 12 years old. And I still cross that border all the time with my family. Several borders. And I take them over there all the time. So I don't need to go with you all or anyone to go to the border and see what's going on over there. Because I take my family. I just took them just a couple of weeks ago. I don't go for a PR stunt. I don't go for anything other than to go and see, and I know what's happening there. I see it all the time. I've seen it since I was a kid. So it's not that this can has been kicked down the road for many presidents, many legislatures, but ultimately it's the federal government's fault, not ours. Now, we as brown-skinned individuals,
10 seconds.
and my father here, he's the one that gets stopped on his car, and he's the one that's paying the price
How do you
for
vote?
what we are doing here. And you all need to start understanding that,
How do you
because we
vote?
are the ones hurting.
How do you vote?
And with that, I vote no.
Lupe Contreras votes no. Assistant Minority Leader De Los Santos,
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
please proceed.
There are a myriad of reasons to oppose this legislation. I would like to highlight its unconstitutionality. And it is my view that this measure violates the Arizona State Constitution in at least two ways. First, Article 4, Part 2, Section 13 of our state's constitution requires that, quote, every act shall embrace but one subject and matters properly connected therewith, end quote. HCR 60 does not cover one subject and matters properly connected to it. Instead, 2060 embraces a hodgepodge of disparate subjects, including employment verification, immigration law, immigration enforcement, sentencing for drug crimes, laws related to city, town, and county administration of public benefits, and the legislature's right to intervene in lawsuits. Simply put, this cannot conceivably be construed as a single subject. This chamber should also be aware that HCR 2060 violates Article 9, Section 23 of the state constitution. Enacted by voters in 2004, Section 23 mandates that, quote, any measure that proposes a mandatory expenditure of state revenues for any purpose must provide for an increased source of revenue sufficient to cover the entire immediate and future costs of the proposal. To determine whether HCR 2060 comports with this constitutional mandate, we must ask ourselves two questions. First, does the initiative propose a mandatory expenditure of state revenues for any purpose? The answer is a resounding yes. The Arizona Department of Corrections estimates that HCR 2060 will force the department to expend hundreds of millions of dollars to incarcerate migrants. And this finding is supported by the JLBC fiscal note that was published on May 31st. Because HCR 2060 proposes a mandatory expenditure, we must then ask whether HCR 2060 provides for an increased revenue source that is sufficient to cover the entire immediate and future costs of the proposal. The answer is a clear no. There is not a single sentence, and in fact, not a single word in the entirety of this measure that provides for an increased revenue source to cover the new costs. In sum, HCR 2060 clearly violates the single subject rule of the Arizona Constitution. And separately, it also violates Article 9, Section 23, because it proposes mandatory expenditures without including additional revenue sources. When I took office, I swore to defend the Arizona Constitution. A vote in favor of HCR 2060 violates that oath. And for that reason, I vote no.
De Los Santos votes no. Representative Carbone,
Mr. Speaker, Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
please proceed.
Well, I guess I went on a field trip. I didn't think it was a field trip the other day, but on that field trip, one of the first things I did learn, though, what is a rape tree? Yeah, that's it, a rape tree. It's a tree used by smugglers near the U.S.-Mexican border to exhibit their sexual assaults by hanging victims' undergarments from the branches. And there was a 10-year-old boy that was raped and murdered, I guess, at that tree. And these trees are all across the border, from California to Texas to here. So let's talk about my district, Yuma. $20 million was spent in 6 months on the hospital taking care of illegals coming in, because that's what they do. They heal and take care of. But that takes away from the resources from the folks that live in my district, folks that suffer from heart attacks, strokes, women who go into labor now have to go to Tucson or Phoenix to have their babies delivered because they don't have the beds. We have the most porous border in the world, folks. I was in Israel a couple months ago, and they had lost 1,200 people in one day. We have lost over 300,000 people to fentanyl poisoning, 100,000 a year. We don't hear world leaders. We don't hear anyone arguing or talking about what's going on at our border. That's what I learned on my field trip. Those are the future teachers, policemen, firemen, doctors that we are losing. future moms and dads, the human trafficking, the indentured servitude that is happening. There was a little boy there yesterday morning, had a little thing on there said, "My mom's in South Carolina," pinned to his jacket. Because what the cartels are doing are holding these people hostage until those folks pay their dues. That mother had to sell herself in South Carolina where they were going. We talk about protecting people. We're racists. Are you kidding me here, folks? This is about life and humanity. It was abhorrent what I saw. It's a disgrace what is happening in our country. These people are becoming victims, and we're creating all these victims on the border. This bill protects America. It protects Arizona. It protects my district, LD25. This is a good bill, and Speaker Pro Tem, I vote aye.
Carbone votes aye. Representative Travers.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
I hear my colleagues on the other side, and I sympathize with our law enforcement and our residents down at the border and the issues that they are all facing. For those who might not know, I was born in Greece. My mother is Greek. She was born and raised in Greece. Greek was my first language, something that I am very proud of. But I have a privilege that others do not. I live in a world without fear. I am not afraid to drive in Arizona. I am not afraid to call the police. I am not afraid to go to a doctor or a hospital because I don't look like what someone thinks an undocumented individual would look like. My colleague mentioned seeing somebody at the border crossing from Ireland. If that person makes it and isn't detained, that person will be able to come to Arizona and not get stopped and not get profiled and be able to go to a doctor and a hospital and send their kids to school because of what they look like. This legislation would create a two-tier system of discrimination. Those that don't possibly fit, once again, the profile, and we've heard many stories of those today who have been profiled, but we don't talk about the people who won't. The people who do come here and stay undocumented and live very fulfilling lives and never get stopped and never get asked for their papers and never get questioned. While I sympathize with the issue that we have and that immigration is a problem that should be addressed, we should allow the federal government to do this, and they are doing this. President Biden just issued a series of executive orders. We have had legislation that has not been voted on and will not get a vote currently. I ask all of my colleagues to be a little bit more circumspect. The unintended consequences of this are huge. Let's not target just one group of individuals. Let's address this problem holistically, and we can do this if we take the time to be more resolute in our circumspection. And with that, I vote no. Thank you, Mr.
Travers
Speaker.
votes no. Representative Montenegro.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, a lot has been said today, but I feel it important to clarify some things as well. I'd like to start by saying, first and foremost, to the individuals watching and listening, to the voters, this is a question for the voters. Why are we sending this to the voters? Well, we know that the dangers at the border are real. It is a real border crisis, a life and death border crisis right now, a public safety border crisis at the border. The individuals from the media who are here have themselves reported that the border is broken, that there is a crisis. You can talk about going down to the border or not, but it doesn't change the reality. People are losing their lives. Children are losing their lives. And we've heard this is the federal government's job. Yet again, the leader today, the minority leader himself, said the federal government has failed. It is their job, and they're not doing their job. It is their problem, but yet they're ignoring it. The Biden administration has failed. The Biden administration has not only failed, they refused to do their job. Not only have they refused to do their job, they have abandoned Arizonans. They have abandoned Americans at the border. And what do we hear today from opponents from this question to the voters? Well, they decide to make it about identity politics. They decide to make it about race. They decide to make it about immigration. This is not about immigration. This is not about race. It's a shame that you bring in identity politics. It is a shame that you have made it an impeachment on law enforcement. Seriously? You're impeaching the integrity of law enforcement when we know people are losing their lives at the border? You know what we heard in committee by some of the members on the other side of the aisle? Specifically that celebrities were against this bill and that pro athletes were clamoring against this. So you'd rather care about what celebrities and pro athletes have to think about Arizona than the people in this state who are suffering because of the lawlessness by the Biden administration. We have sent numerous bills up to the governor,
15
and she
seconds.
has failed. She has vetoed every single one. So this is why today we go to the voters and we ask the voters, please help us. And if you don't like it, make your case with the voters, take it out with them. Let's let them decide. I vote aye.
Montenegro votes aye. Cruz,
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
you're up.
All right, say 3 minutes. We've heard a lot about Christian values in this chamber. Jesus was a refugee. He and his parents fled to Egypt to escape King Herod's slaughter of baby boys in Bethlehem. In Egypt, they found shelter and safety, much like our human family coming to America seeking a better life. While my ancestors, please be respectful. Thank you. While my ancestors were brought here to this land against their will,
keep the
my family
conversations
has
to a
lived
minimum.
here for centuries. While I can trace my family back to the 1700s in Louisiana and South Carolina, I am only the second generation to experience the full rights of citizenship. I believe more should be done by the federal government to ensure safety and address the backlog of asylum cases. We are in dire need of immigration reform. This unconstitutional bill being sent to the ballot box is dangerous. There are many concerns that have not been addressed, such as who will pay for it. We've heard this bill won't lead to racial profiling. Well, history tells us it will. I respect the remarks that have been made by my colleagues who don't have brown skin, but let me tell you, I've been racially profiled, whether or not you believe me. Not all law enforcement officers are racist, but the law enforcement has been weaponized by racist individuals. If this bill is so safe for American citizens, why grant 100% immunity to law enforcement officers? Why does law enforcement need protection if they're not going to do anything wrong? What many crimes will be neglected because law enforcement will be enforcing this unconstitutional bill? I'm concerned about the fentanyl epidemic, but you don't hit yourself in the foot trying to save the other. Just last month, Roger Fortson was shot by a sheriff who recently lost his job for murdering him. The point of the matter is Black and brown human family are racially profiled without encouraging legislation. Arizonans deserve better than this. We keep hearing this thing about race. Well, race is something that those of us with brown skin have to deal with. We don't have the luxury of just ignoring it or acting like it's not a big deal. This bill will take us in the wrong direction. I stand with our community, with my diversely rich district that I share with Representative Aguilar, where over 64 languages are spoken at home, where it's home to many refugees of Black and brown descent, and those who are our European neighbors. We are diverse.
10 seconds.
And this bill is not healthy. It's not safe for my district. And on behalf of the many constituents of LD 26, I vote against this bill, and I encourage others to do the same. Thank you.
Cruz votes no. Representative Diaz,
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
please proceed.
I live in Cochise County. It is the ground zero for a lot of the activity that has been spoken of today. Our sheriff down there has 1,300 cameras across the Arizona, California, and into New Mexico border. And he sees a lot of the activity coming through there. This bill is addressing illegal entry. That's what it's doing. There are people who are coming into the border illegally. They're conducting business, and commerce. I'm surprised that the Chamber of Commerce's are against this bill as much as they are. But what we're dealing with is illegal entry. His cameras have caught 60,000 gotaways or people coming through the border illegally, and they were never caught. And that is just the ones that the cameras have caught in those areas. There are many, many more people that were never recorded on these cameras. They're coming through, not through ports of entry, where I've heard a lot of our colleagues talk about, entering into through the borders legally. No, these people are coming in. And as far as profiling is concerned, I'm thinking about, there are 150 plus countries represented as these people are coming through. I read an article just the other day that California was seeing some people coming in from the northern part of the Kakistan or the Kakistan countries. They look whiter than many of you in this room. And so, to be able to think that this is a, profiling, I don't think that's true. We need to disincentivize people coming from the border into the border and into the United States. Right now, we have a welcome, welcome banner across the open parts of the border, and they're not even coming through legally. And so, and because of that, we have seen a lot of crime. In my area alone, again, we're at ground zero down there. We have seen home invasions. We have seen businesses broken into. My place, just where I live, we have had the Border Patrol and the helicopters flying over our house 3 different times. And there's been, Border Patrol all over the place, capturing people that have been running from Border Patrol because they were not documented. And talk about, pulling papers. I was just at a hotel just this week, and somebody asked me for an ID card.
10 seconds.
They asked me for an ID card, and so there's a lot of things that we have to do to secure the border. Thank you, and with that, I vote yes.
Diaz votes aye. Representative Blattman,
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
please proceed.
The border is an issue that needs to be addressed. Executive action is being taken today after congressional Republicans walked away from a deal that would have helped. Action needs to be taken, but passing this Arizona-only immigration policy is misguided. I'm against it for all the reasons that have been listed, including that it will lead to racial profiling. However, it is the economic impact I want to focus on in this moment. More than a dozen business organizations, including chambers of commerce, have come out against this unfunded mandate. And as we have seen, the negative economic impact similar legislation has caused. As a business owner, I have a simple request. Stop passing laws that embarrass our state. When we make Arizona look like a backward state, it unnecessarily hurts my business. Please stop hurting my business and all the other small businesses in Arizona. I vote no.
Blattman votes no. Mr. Dunn.
Mr. Speaker, Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, born and raised in Yuma, Arizona, down on the border. HCR 2060 is about border security, putting key existing programs that are already in federal law into state law. When the federal government fails to do act, states need to take action. Being on a farm, we have dealt with immigration all my life, legal and illegal, trying to develop a plan. This is not an immigration bill. This is a border security bill that we have to address. 2060 does not allow racial profiling. Read the bill. It does not allow racial profiling. 2060 does not bring back those people who were killed by fentanyl overdose, like my cousin's daughter, Audra Kissel, or my brother-in-law's son, Pat Bouchard. This bill does not stop those who want to apply for asylum and come through the ports of entry illegally. They can do that. This bill strictly goes between the ports of entry. If you are wanting to come through the port, you go there. If you don't, you come to the desert and you have probable cause through those cameras that Representative Diaz was talking about, that you guys helped me fund. Those cameras can provide probable cause. People, on their witnesses, can provide probable cause. We have other crimes that we deal with. If someone robs a bank in Yuma, Arizona, and you put an APP out for them and they get arrested in Flagstaff, they had probable cause. They can get pulled over. If you don't have that probable cause, you cannot pull them over. The bill is going to ratchet up penalties for fentanyl. You knowingly sell fentanyl, kill someone, you should go to jail. And it does require, which is already a federal law, providing false documents. If you don't say who you are when you put those documents, that's already federal law. That codifies it in state law. It's about those countries, 171 countries that have been coming across our border illegally. Some of those are Peru, Bolivia, Honduras, Lebanon, Africa, Iraq, El Salvador, Germany, Cuba, Nicaragua, Philippines, Panama, Romania, Colombia, Afghanistan, about 6,386 is the last count. China, 26,113. Guatemala, United Arab Emirates, Russia, 12,603 of those. Syrians, 538. Egyptians, and Iranians. People who not all of them want to do harm, but those people who are coming across our desert not even give up, but they're coming across the gotaways, they want to do harm. There's a reason that they are not allowed to apply for asylum. They are either smuggling people, smuggling drugs, or they have a rap sheet that they will not allow to be have in our country. Yesterday, around between 12 and 2 o'clock, the San Luis police chief in San Luis Rio, Colorado was assassinated right as we were finishing up our visit.
How do you vote?
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, House Bill HCR 2060, I vote aye.
Dunn votes aye. Wilmoth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Over the last week, I've gotten to see 2 different tours and informational sessions in 2 different parts of the state. Cochise County, home of Mr. Diaz and Mrs. Griffin. They let me hang out there for a couple of days. Very nice of them. And then over the weekend and into Monday in Yuma, which has some amazing tacos, as Representative Martinez proved to me. That night, it was Monday morning, from about 1 to 4 o'clock. I got to be a part of this tour that all of us were invited to, and I really encourage not only every member to go and do this, but every Arizonan, every member of the media, every American should just go down and watch what goes on a daily basis along our border. The thing that I couldn't help but be escaped from my mind was just how orchestrated it was, and by that I mean it's just so perfunctory, it's so processed, it's so orderly. We're talking about people that are not going through the normal legal channels of immigration into our country, which I am all about. I think that's wonderful. These are folks that are trying to sneak in, which anybody in a backyard, you wouldn't want that to happen in your house, right? So we're watching these folks through the 30-foot fence, and they're standing there calmly, And Customs and Border Patrol is processing them, telling them what to do. Everything's orderly. There's no violence. These folks are relatively clean, and that it looks like they probably Ubered over. We saw these cars, the cartels bring them over close to the border, and then they let them out, and then they walk across the river to a part of the country that is not that's in front of the fence, and then that's where they get processed and all of that jazz. And I just couldn't help but be amazed by that we're basically encouraging this. And it's very heartbreaking because I think for everybody that's here, whether they're born here or here legally, it's a detriment to all of us that have done it the right way. And this is not about going after folks because of their skin color, in my opinion. This is going around and going after people that are not coming here for the right ways or the right reasons. Because if they could get asylum, if they could do things the proper ways, they should. Now, we can get into discussions on the hellscape that is the immigration process in the United States, and that's a federal issue, and that's something I think should absolutely see a lot of reforms. But we can't do that. But what we can do is give our authorities another tool in the toolbox to give them an option to help protect their communities and their borders, which I think is very important, which is what this bill is. And by the way, this is going to go to the people. And this is a huge issue in my district. I know for a fact it is. And it's a huge issue all across the state. Who are we to get in the way of them deciding for themselves if they think this is a good idea or not? We're a 31-29 legislature. We probably know what's going to happen here with this vote. Maybe this is really a 31-29 state. Maybe this bill, maybe this referral will almost pass or almost fail. But we'll find out in November because I'm voting aye.
Wilmoth votes aye. Representative Stahl Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I think my colleagues have done an incredible job explaining all of the legal and technical problems with this bill. And I think we've talked on this issue and have talked about it in very, very many different ways and facets. But I think for me, when I first ran for office, it was because I realized the capacity that this body has to shape the lives of everyday Arizonans. And I think this bill is right up there at the top of that shaping. And I'd like to share a story of two moms in Arizona. We both born in Arizona. I was born in Flagstaff. She was born in Bisbee. We have children the same age. Our kids went to school together. She taught my child in preschool. We worked in the after-school garden club together. She coached my children in cross country. And yet, when it came time for our boys to go to prom, she looked at her son and said, "There's a curfew. Be home before midnight." I looked at my boy and said, "There's a curfew. Be home before midnight." My boy looked at me and said, "What are they going to do? I'm white." Her boy, on his way home before midnight, was pulled over. And as much as we are hearing about how control or not control of our border affects our state, I can tell you the way that my friend has had to raise her children and help them learn how to step through the world, enter into their adult years, has been very different from the ways that I have had to raise my children. There is unintended consequences to this legislation. And we are fooling ourselves if we think just because it's in or not in a bill that that's how life is going to play out.
How do you vote?
I cannot vote yes for this bill. I vote no.
Stahl Hamilton votes no. Austin.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, my rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Members and Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, what you mentioned earlier, what happened in the Senate 2 weeks ago, I agree with you. I agree when Senator Kavanaugh called members of the gallery criminals. I thought that was very inappropriate. I don't know why, if you were afraid of a member doing that again today.
All
but I
right,
think the public
Representative
should be
Austin,
here.
you're going to speak on HCR 2060?
I am.
All right, go
But
ahead.
I want to make that very clear. The
Please
people should be
proceed.
here. There are so many issues to talk about the humanitarian crisis at the border. I want to make, I think, something very clear that historically, we have always given preference to European countries and not those closest to us or near us. I think there's for very clear reasons. In the 1920s, and this is very well documented in research and history. I received my degree in immigration policy. 1920s, our immigration policy centered around eugenics and making sure that only certain people, white people, came to this country and had the opportunities afforded to them. In 1933, the US racially profiled and deported over 1 million people from the United States back to Mexico, and 60% of them were American citizens. In 1940, we threw our Japanese American community into detention camps. In 1942 through 1964, we established the Bracero program because we saw the need for labor in this country. We cannot survive to this day in this country without our undocumented communities and immigrant labor. But in 1952, we increased quotas again from European countries and gave preferential treatment to them. So people that say, my family came over the right way, I'm such and such generation, second or third, there's a very good reason why you are, because you were allowed and others were not. In 1980, there was a Refugee Act, once again, that gave preference to European countries. In 1986 was the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which did naturalize hundreds of thousands of undocumented people into US citizens. And then again in 1990, the Immigration Act of 1990 allocated 55,000 visas, which once again gave preferential treatment to European countries. It's a very clear understanding of who we prefer to have in this country. And when people say there will be no racial profiling, we don't have to guess or assume, we know because we've seen it. And many members in this caucus don't have to guess or assume, we know because this caucus, Democratic caucus, is very reflective of the Arizona and Arizonans that we serve. I want to also address the criminality piece. Immigrants are 60% less likely to be incarcerated other than American citizens. And the Marshall Project did a 9-year study that found there was no correlation between undocumented persons and an increase in violent or property crimes. Please stop criminalizing our community. A la gente de Arizona le quiero decir que vamos a seguir luchando por ustedes.
How do you vote?
Siempre.
Your time has expired. How do you vote?
I vote no to this
Representative Austin
bill that will
votes
racial
no.
profile
Representative Carter.
Arizona.
Mr. Explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Equal justice under law. Equal justice under law is emblazoned on the United States Supreme Court building, and it's derived from their 14th Amendment jurisprudence, which of course reflects the American ideal of equality among the races. And I think really that this is about equality and about justice and about law. That's what this is really about. This is a great country. We've always encouraged immigration. 2 of my grandparents are immigrants. And I too lived abroad. I lived in Mexico where I worked. I lived in France and in England where I also worked, all told about 5 years. And I was required to comply with the laws of those countries. This is about compliance with the law. One of my best friends, Lan Vu, was the best man at my wedding. And he is a Vietnamese immigrant. And he followed all the correct procedures and policies. And his brother waited 12 years. 12 years his brother waited for immigration to the United States. I know this because I went to support his immigration application at a consulate in another country. And it's unfair to my friend's brother to wait 12 years while we allow other people to flaunt the law. And so for me, this is about equal justice under law. It's really about fairness and about justice. And all we're really asking is for compliance with the law. And so I vote aye.
Carter votes aye. Representative Luna Najera.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I grew up in a mixed status household. My dad was a proud bracero here in the United States. There was always a sense of fear and uncertainty in our family. Growing up in such a household, I was reminded that I was not like my classmates. I needed to remember that if I was ever asked by the migra what my legal status was, that I was to truthfully and honestly say that I am an American citizen. School and church were my family's safe havens. Until my parents' legal status was adjusted, I grew up in fear. HB 2060 will continue to allow this type of fear to fester in our communities and our mixed status families. There is no exception for schools or places of worship. We have learned a lot about trauma and continue to do so. We are still dealing with the last slew of family separations, both physically and emotional unintended consequences. We cannot continue to instill fear and trauma into children and families caught in the middle of a problem that the federal government needs to fix. And with that, I vote no.
Senator Nahara votes no. Representative Heap.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
So my Democratic colleagues are right about one thing. This bill would be unnecessary if the federal government had not absolutely failed in its duty. Under President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, our illegal immigration had dropped to its lowest rate in decades. Even prior to that, under President Obama, we still maintained our border and we deported 3 million illegal immigrants to this country. It was only with our current administration where we decided that we would simply abrogate the duty of the federal government to protect our border, to maintain the integrity of our system. And instead, we have changed our Border Patrol and our customs into simply having the duty of processing and even facilitating the mass migration of people into our state from every part of the third world. Here in this House, we have talked for 2 years about the problems facing Arizona. Every problem that we discuss and that we rule on becomes more difficult, if not impossible, to solve if we have open borders and unchecked immigration. From housing to water to medical care to public safety to transportation. I've listened to 100 floor speeches about housing crisis, how we need to build another 20,000 housing units to address the housing crisis. What exactly is 20,000 new housing units going to do when more than 20,000 people a day stream across our southern border? We cannot address these issues. And when the federal government completely withdraws from its responsibility to enforce the law, then it becomes incumbent on the states to take action on that and enforce it themselves. I hear my Democratic colleagues concerned about the costs that may accrue in this. Arizona citizens are already paying costs for illegal immigration every day. They pay it in their housing, they pay it in their utility bills, they pay it in their grocery bills, their medical care, they pay it in their insurance, and as we've heard today, some of them pay for it with their lives and with the safety of their communities. And the worst thing about all of that is that the people of Arizona were never asked. They were never consulted. No one asked them if they wanted an open border, if they wanted to have complete unrestricted immigration into their communities with no lawful process. It was simply thrust upon them. This bill gives them the chance. It gives them a say and a choice in how we will enforce our laws in Arizona. I have nothing but compassion for the people who want to come here, but the solution to the problems of the third world cannot be make them Arizonans. We need to enforce our law. We need to protect our people, Arizona citizens of every race and creed. That is who we represent. I vote aye.
Heap votes aye. Majority Leader B. Asucci.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. With your permission to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
You know, President Biden today actually did sign an executive order, and so I got to give credit where credit's due. And in that executive order, he's doing exactly what we are doing here today. He's saying that if you're coming to this country and claiming asylum, you must come through a legal port of entry. This is what our bill is asking. but it's 3.5 years too late. The federal government has been failing to do the job that they have promised to do to protect our border. And so when that happens, like my colleague stated before, we must exercise our 10th Amendment right to protect our state and protect the citizens of the state. And this is what this bill is doing. This is saying the 10th Amendment is real. Our founding fathers put it in the Constitution for a reason, and it's up to us to take over if they are not doing their job. Now, I want to read some stories from you because this is the thing that impacts me the most with the border. These all come from credible news sources. It was dark in the stash house where they kept her, the windows covered so no one could see inside. At first, the smugglers had her cook for the other migrants who had recently crossed illegally into the United States. Then they took her to a room upstairs, locked the door, and began taking turns with her. It was the summer of 2014, and Melvin, a 36-year-old mother of 3, had just completed the journey from her native Guatemala, crossing the Rio Grande on a raft before being led to a house in the Texas border city of McAllen. For weeks, she was locked in a room where men that she had paid to give her safely across the United States border had drugged her with pills and cocaine, refusing to let her out to even bathe. I think that since they put me in that room, they killed me. They raped us so many times that it didn't even seem like I was a human being anymore. In 2017, a guide leading a group of migrants through the Tohono Nation's reservation in Arizona raped a woman from El Salvador twice during a 7-day desert hike, threatening to leave her stranded if she resisted. I hope I leave you pregnant so you have one of my kids, said the smuggler. Gladys, 45, a mother of 4 from Guatemala, said she was kidnapped by armed smugglers after crossing the border and jumped out of the car to escape, but was captured again. For days, she was held prisoner at a stash house in McAllen, Texas, and forced to have sex with 6 men. I thought it would be better if I died when I fell from that car. When we were in Yuma, we visited a facility where this is all they did. They treated women and children who were sexually assaulted and raped on their journey across the border. Why are we even sitting here complaining that money is an issue? If we spend $1 billion to make sure that no child gets raped again, I'll happily do it in this legislature. It is our job to do whatever we can to protect every human being, including our women and children. And money should never be a reason to not do that. I proudly stand for this bill. I will proudly vote for this bill. And I ask every single person in the state of Arizona to do the right thing and vote yes, like I am today. Thank you.
Bisucci votes aye. Speaker Toma.
Mr. Speaker, per time, I'd like to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Lots has been said about this bill, but most of these talking points, especially from my colleagues on the left, seem to be from a different bill because they're clearly wrong. For example, there is no immunity for police discrimination in the bill. The bill does 3 things broadly. It has enhanced sentencing for fentanyl dealing. 2, it strengthens E-Verify and prevents applicants from submitting false documents to qualify for public benefits. 3, it makes it a state crime to enter Arizona from a foreign nation somewhere other than a legal point of entry. With respect, parents will not be called to parent-teacher conferences and arrested for being illegal. The standard in this bill is probable cause, not reasonable suspicion, like all the other so-called previous mistakes in other bills. This cannot be honestly referred to as the show me your papers bill. There are no exemptions required because none of that is true. Cost. It's been said that this bill will cost up to a couple $100 million, but no one has mentioned that the very same fiscal note that my colleagues ordered from JLBC also states that illegal immigration costs this state over $3.2 billion annually. Further, other studies have shown that it costs the U.S. as a whole $200 or nearly $200 billion annually.
Point of order has been called. Who called a point of order? Ms. Ortiz. Please state your point of order into your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I would like to raise a point of order on Rule 18, number D. No member shall interrupt another while speaking except to correct a mistake. Respectfully, Mr. Speaker mentioned that that we were reading the wrong bill and that there is no immunity. However, if we go ahead and look at the actual language of the Senate engrossed version, page 7, line 9 is where the section begins about complete civil immunity for state and local public entities, officials, employees, and contractors in the process of enforcing HCR 2060. So respectfully, the speaker is inaccurate in that statement.
Thank you.
That's what I actually said. I didn't say that.
Okay, Ms. Ortiz has stated her point of order. Mr. Speaker, I'll give you a chance to clarify your comments if you'd like. We'll start your timer running again, and you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, my exact comment by which I stand is that there is no immunity for police discrimination in the bill. And there isn't. As I was trying to say, I'm an immigrant. This is not anti-immigrant. This is anti-lawlessness. It's about securing our border because the federal government has failed to do their job. The people of Arizona will get the final say in this issue, and I'm proud to send it to them. I vote aye.
Toma votes aye. Close the board. 31 ayes, 29 noes. You've passed HCR 2060, signed in open session. Clerk's instructed to record the action of the House, convey the bill to the Secretary of State. Points of personal privilege. Does anyone have a point of personal privilege or announcement before the motion to adjourn? Mr. Lucking.
Mr. Speaker, rise to introduce guests in the House.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Josh Yano is in the House somewhere. He's not in the gallery for sure. He's a friend. He's a specialist in web design, digital marketing, a small business owner. He works in the premium cigar industry, and we welcome him to his house. Thanks so much for coming, Josh.
Welcome to the House, Josh. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I move that the House stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Wednesday, June 12th, or until such earlier time as the Speaker may determine, whenever in his opinion legislative expediency shall warrant it, which shall be at least 24 hours after the Speaker has notified the members of the House to reassemble and given public notice of the reassembly.
You've heard the motion. All in favor vote aye. All opposed vote no. Ayes have it. The House will stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Wednesday, June 12th, 2024, or until such earlier time as the Speaker may determine, whenever in his opinion legislative expediency shall warrant it, which shall be at least 24 hours after the Speaker has notified the members of the House to reassemble and given public notice of assembly. House is adjourned.